As Rich said, I'm Sarah Fitzpatrick. I'm an Executive Fire Prevention Officer for Dublin Fire Brigade. And today I'm just here to talk about fire safety certificates and in more depth, the compliance reports that actually go with it. So today we're just going to talk about the different types of fire certs that you can actually apply for, compliance reports themselves, and then I'll actually go into further information, revised information and extension time requests and why we actually ask for these. So it's just a wee little disclaimer here. So Dublin Fire Brigade make every effort to ensure the accuracy and comprehensiveness of the information supplied in this presentation, but the presentation is the opinion of Dublin Fire Brigade, and you're reminded that other fire authorities may have a different opinion. So you're better off if you have a specific question in relation to a building in a certain local authority, you're best speaking to the fire authority within that local authority. So there's 4 different types of fire certs. You have your normal fire safety certificate application. This is required where an applicant proposes a new building, a new building extension, material alteration to an existing building, or a change of use to an existing building. A revised fire safety certificate. This application is required in respect of works that have been already granted a fire safety certificate, but where the significant revisions need to be made for reasons other than fire safety, examples, conditions attached to the plan of permission, changes in design, etc. 7-day notice fire safety certificate application. The submission of a fire safety certificate application can be accompanied by a 7-day notice. This is used where persons intend to commence building works before the grant of the relevant fire safety certificate. One thing I'll say about a 7-day notice, it's a lot of risk in actually applying for one, because essentially you are starting to build without having a granted fire cert. So the issue is with that, design can change. You could be at that building level at that point, which means that part of the construction has to come down or be altered, which then could have a knock-on effect, which costs more money. And then we have our regularisation fire safety certificate. This is required where building works require a fire safety certificate where commenced or completed post the 1st of June 1992, and that's a really date that people need to remember, without an associated fire cert application. So how do you make a valid fire cert? So under the building control regulations, it actually lays it out on how to make a valid application. And in 2001, the BCMS was actually introduced that now permits electronic submissions. It's actually helped us significantly. You can still submit hard copies, and you need 2 copies of every document bar your application form. So the documents needed to make a valid fire safety certificate application is you need your application form. You need to ensure that it's been signed. The amount of them we get in that's not. Drawings, which include site location map, site plan, floor plans, elevations and sections. One thing I'll say about the drawings, they are very similar on plan and drawings in some retrospects, and I'll go into a bit more detail in them. And then you have your compliance report, and then you have your appropriate fee to be attached. Other documents that may be accompanied to fire cert is your 7-day notice form and your statutory declaration. So this is just then broken down to each different application. So your fee for a normal fire cert is $290. You have your standard application form, proposed drawings, and your compliance report. Revised, same fee, revised application form, proposed drawings, and compliance report. Your 7-day notice, the fee jumps to $580 per square metre. You've got your 7-day notice form, you've got a statutory declaration, and you've got an application form. Now, one thing to be cognizant of is that your application form is attached to your fire cert, whereas the 7-day notice and the statutory declaration is a building control, and that actually goes into building control. So they are 2 parts of the same coin, but they are still separate. And then you've got your proposed drawings and your compliance report then. And then the only real major difference is the regularisation. Your fee jumps all the way to $11.60 per square metre. You've got your application form, your statutory declaration is attached as well. You've got as finished drawings, and this is really important, that they're drawings that the building is when it's finished. So if the building is built or if it's 50% completed, the drawings need to show what the building will be when it's finished. And as completed, a compliance report. And that's really particular as well, because some of the fire certs we get in, the compliance report, the wording in the compliance report was the stairs will comply with or shall comply with. The building's built, so it does comply. You have to, there's no ambiguity in terms of does it comply or not. It does comply, and that's what you should be demonstrating. So what is a compliance report? A compliance report is to include a detailed argument to demonstrate how the proposed buildings or works as shown in the submitted drawings complies with each of the requirements of Part B of the second schedule to the Building Regulations 1997-2001 as follows. So you've got B1, means of escape, B2, internal fire spread linings, B3, internal fire spread structure, B4, external fire spread, and B5, access and facilities for fire service. I'll go into a little bit more detail in them. So if you actually go back to first principles on what B1 actually is, under the building regulations, a building shall be so designed and constructed that there are adequate means of escape in case of fire from the building to a place of safety outside the building, capable of being safely and effectively used. So essentially, your compliance report for B1, that's what you have to demonstrate compliance with. B2, internal fire spread and linings. For the purpose of inhibiting the spread of fire within the building, the internal linings A shall have either a rate of heat release or a rate of fire growth and a resistance to ignition, which is reasonable in the circumstances, and shall offer adequate resistance to the spread of flame over their surfaces. B3, it's broken down into 4 points. 1, a building shall be designed and constructed that in the event of fire, its stability will be maintained for a reasonable period. 2A, a wall common to 2 or more buildings shall be so designed and constructed that it offers adequate resistance to the spread of fire between those buildings. 2B, a building shall be subdivided with fire resistant construction where it is necessary to inhibit the spread of fire within the building. 3, a building shall be so designed and constructed that the unseen spread of fire and smoke within concealed spaces in its structure or fabric is inhibited where necessary. And 4, for the purpose of subparagraph 2A, a house and a terraced and semi-detached house are each to be treated as being a separate building. B4 is external fire spread. The external walls and roof of a building shall be so designed and constructed that they afford adequate resistance to the spread of fire to and from neighbouring buildings. And then finally, B5, this is actually something that tends to be slightly forgotten about in terms of compliance reports, but we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But B5, a building shall be so designed and constructed that there is adequate provision for fire appliances and such other facilities as may be reasonably required to assist the fire service in the protection of life and property. So how do you demonstrate B1 to B5? This is a couple of ways you can demonstrate it, but to demonstrate prima facie compliance, it's the use of TGDB. Now this is the older version, but I don't have the reprint with me. So to use TGDB, you also have to use the 5588 suite documents, and they are still permissible to be used. We do sometimes get in applications that they try and use 9991 in conjunction with TGDB. That's a cherry pick mix approach, which isn't actually permitted. If you want to use 9991 and 9999, they are to be used holistically and fully from cover to cover from B1 to B5. Whereas if you want to do prima facie compliance, it's TGDB. So then you use the suite of 5588 documents. And that's where I go into in section 0.1.4, TGDB allows for your alternative solutions to be used. So as TGDB states, the detailed provisions set out in this document are intended to provide guidance for some of the more common building situations. In other situations, alternative ways of achieving compliance with the requirements of Part B of the second schedule to the building regulations may be appropriate. There is no obligation to adopt any particular solution contained wherein or herein. The use of alternative design solutions, so your 9991, your 9999, your B.Sc code, design solution standards, systems and methods of fire protection to those outlined in the document are acceptable, provided the level of fire safety is achieved, is adequate, to satisfy the requirements of building regulations. So you need to still demonstrate compliance with the building regulations, which is that B1 to B5. So there you're going back to first principles on that. Now, what tends to sometimes happen, and the fire officers are probably smart at this, we'll go back to this document. See, well, what does this one say first? And we'll probably base our arguments sometimes on that document. So when you come to compliance reports, how do you formulate them? And what we've noticed, I know in Dublin Fire Brigade, I don't know about other local authorities, that the quality of some of the certs is starting to drop slightly. And I don't know if that's just because of the volume of work that's out there at the moment. There's some compliance report that are missing headings within sections, which means I'll go into more detail on that, but it gives the fire, all you're doing is creating more work for the fire officer at the end of the day, or the person assessing the application. So if you have a clear, concise document that's easily laid out, it makes the fire officers or the assessor's job very easy. So it should be clearly laid out. These are all the headings in TGDB. As you can see, B1 to B5. But if one thing that always gets forgotten about is B0, and that actually tells you your purpose groups. And they need to be clearly defined so that you can then use the correct suite of documents to be able to prove compliance or to demonstrate compliance. And what's also should really be included in B0 is your scope of work. And all it is a clear and defined synopsis of the work that's actually been carried out. And it gives the fire officer or the assessor a clear indication of what's been proposed in the report. So they know then as they read the report what they're actually looking at. And then, so this is just B1. So if you look at TGDB, the headings are all then broken down further. And one thing in compliance reports is these kind of are the headings that you should be following. If you look at the 1.4 general provisions for means of escape, you've got headings of protection of escape routes, doors of escape routes, construction of escape stairways, height of escape routes, floors of escape routes, final exits, lighting of escape routes, lifts, electrical, ventilation, refuse, and so on. If you don't cover one section within that heading, the fire officer is going to question it. It's like, well, I'm not providing a ventilation system, so I'm just not going to include it in the report. That's all and well and good, but the fire officer doesn't know there's no ventilation. So you're best putting the heading in and saying, we're not providing any ventilation systems to the building. That gives a clear indication to the assessor or the fire officer that there is none in it, so they're grand. Next one. Now, some things we have, speaking with our building control team, what's cropped up on sites is what's been said in the compliance report. So you've said there's no ventilation systems, but then all of a sudden when the building goes to site, there's a ventilation system in it now. But you have in your compliance report, there is nothing, or you haven't mentioned it. That starts to leave ambiguity now on site of what's actually to be constructed. Are you in compliance with your fire cert now because you're putting in an extra provision that hasn't been approved? And what tends to happen is it will be bumped back then to a revised fire cert to be put in to include that deviation. A little bit more work then for the fire officer again, and then more work for building controls. So I think from a person actually completing a fire cert or carrying out a fire cert, they should clearly sit down and look at all the provisions. Do they need to comply with it, or is it causing no or near greater contravention? So if we just look at the purpose group 1C, just in terms of today, flats and masonettes, it clearly defines within TGDB what documents to be used. And sometimes we find with compliance reports, that's well and good, they'll use a certain section of 5588, but they actually won't use the whole thing, what the section actually states. So as you can clearly see, it states to use 5588 and then jump to section 1.4 TGDB, then use 1.4 all the way to 1.8. But if you actually look underneath that, it tells you only have to use section 3 and section 5 of 5588. That tends to be quite forgotten about. So said for flats and masonettes, B1 used the conjunction 5588 part 1 in TGDB, and then for B2 to B5, it's all TGDB. And then, as I said, when you break down the headings, every heading you should address it. And then if it's not applicable, just state it. If you're not doing it, state it. Gives, as I said, it gives the fire officer a clear idea. The key is you need to demonstrate compliance. It's not good enough saying, yeah, I'm going to comply with that section. How are you complying? Because now you're stopping ambiguity then happening on site. Now, I don't want to see specification works. I don't want to see that in it, but you still need to demonstrate, and I'll go in. Also, you need to watch your wording. Should and shall. There's ambiguity then between the two of them. It shall comply, whereas should, is it going to comply? Should or shall is the wording that should be used. And you'll notice that in a lot of conditions that we actually put in fire certs. So remember, as part of your compliance report, you need to demonstrate compliance. So state shall comply with section 1.2.3.1 of TGDB. But your improved version should be in a room shall comply with section 1.2.3 TGDB and comply with each single one of those items. So if you look and break down at the inner room section per se, and you look at A, in a room should be not likely to have more than 20 occupants. Your compliance report, you should look at your compliance report and say, well, I've only got 18 people in that room because I've said that at the start of the report. So I'll tell them, well, it complies within a room because all I have is 18 people in it. Tell us what you're putting in that. So it stops us having to jump back and forth on compliance reports, makes it easier, stops total confusion then in the long run. And it stops us having to put conditions on fire certs as well. So if you're complying with that whole section, it needs to comply with every single one of those points. And you need to address them. So if you're not putting vision panels in it, well, I'm not putting vision panels in it, so I don't need to comply with that section. And it helps the building control officer then out doing B-car inspections then in the long run. So what's further information and why do we ask for it? So further information is requested before we actually validate a cert. And the reasons why we ask for further information can be a multitude of items. But if we go back to what is actually a valid fire cert. So drawings, we could have missing floor plans, missing sections, missing elevations, missing site plans, missing site locations, not been able to identify where the actual site is. They haven't told us, they haven't given us any ordnance survey details. They haven't given us a road name on it. I've seen some that they've just given me a Google pin and nothing else. So that's not really good enough. That's not telling us where the site actually is. North signs missing as well. North signs missing. Drawings not to scale. Dimensions missing off drawings because the fire certs have gone digital. We're now no longer using our ruler to measure up drawings. We have programs to be able to assess drawings digitally. So I have to, as a part of validating a cert, I have to calculate the area to make sure the appropriate fee has been paid. So if the drawing's not to scale, and in one actual fact, or one particular occasion, I had a fire cert submitted to myself and I scaled it up on the system we were using. I tried to do the area calculations, it wouldn't work. So then I tried to have a look to see if the dimensions were working, they weren't working. So I put out a further information request to say, can you please provide scaled drawings? And they called me straight away and said, but they are scaled because when I print them, they're scaled. That's fine, but when I look at the screen, they're not scaled. You haven't scaled them digitally. So that's how we view them. You can print to scale, but you need to also PDF to scale as well. Compliance reports then, so missing sections B1 to B5, and we already went through them. Incorrect purpose group defined or used as a demonstration. So this one's a bit tricky because it can actually fall into an assessment because sometimes you don't really pick it up sometimes on your validation. But for example, they're saying it's a retail use, but they're using it as a cafe. But in TGDB, cafes are noted to fall under purpose group 5, which is assembly recreation. So just be very conscious of the purpose group you're actually providing, because I actually think it has a knock-on effect to Part M then as well. Also, another reasons why we would ask for further information, application form is one of the biggest pet peeves of DFP at the moment. Application form not signed. The address is incorrect, and I'll show you one. That's why it's in red. Or incorrect or not precise enough. Incorrect area been calculated or incorrect fee. So when you actually look at the application form, there's details at the bottom of that for it. So if you put in the incorrect information, we actually can't validate it until the correct information is on it. So address incorrect. Does anyone know James's Street? It's about a kilometre long. It's over 200 buildings, I think, on it. What building is that? Now, I think there is a slight issue with the way it's submitted onto the BCMS or how it's actually asked for on the BCMS. They ask for street, I think it is, and that's where the confusion lies. But this is what goes on the grant, the location of the works. And that's what's on the application form. So one thing to be very conscious of is after you fill out the information through the BCMS, particularly, once you download the form, that has to be then uploaded once it's signed. Once you download it, check it, make sure that it makes sense and that you've filled it out correctly. Because it's at that time where it's easy to change that information, whereas once it's validated or if there's an issue after validation, it's a lot harder to change. This is another thing as well that's kind of a bit of a pet peeve with some of the officers at the moment. Descriptions of work. Now, this isn't a reason why we wouldn't invalidate something or ask for further information, but in terms, this is one fire cert that's been granted. The descriptions of works, if you just read that, it says partial change of use from the first floor apartment to medical consultant suites and material alterations to the first floor medical suite and common corridor at X. Remove existing kitchen, internal partitions, walls, and proposed plans to form proposed consultancy rooms. Form new openings to connect proposed new consultancy rooms to existing medical facilities to expand capacity, water fed to new consultancy rooms, upgrading the fire alarm, associated wiring, make good ceilings and upgrade finishes throughout the including entrance and stair. That's what goes on the grant. So when you provide a description of works, it needs to be just clear on what you're doing for the fire cert. Is there an alteration happening? Are you doing a change of use? Kind of key points that I would probably put on myself if I was doing an application, if I wasn't in the fire brigade, would be the height of the building, as in, is it over the 10 meters? Is it over the 18 meters? Is it over the 20 meters? Because they're all pivotal numbers in terms of a fire cert application. And it automatically tells the fire officer or the person assessing the cert straight away that I can't use timber. They can't, they're going to need a firefighting shaft. Now they're going to have issues with the cladding if it's over the 18 meters. So you're already given the fire officer a clear idea straight away of what you're proposing within the works. By putting all the extra stuff in it, it's not needed. Okay, and it's a bit of a pet peeve. It's not, we would never invalidate something, but this is just another one as well. Block 2, and actually one thing to say, when we go to try search for fire certs afterwards, it's harder through our systems because that's a description of works that we're getting. So it's just harder for us as well. This is another description, block 2, the application relates to apartment block 2, which is located at X. The site contains 2 additional blocks where the subject separates application. The proposed development shall consist of the demolition of dwellings as X and X for the construction of a total of 44 studio apartments, 3 blocks. Apartment 2 will consist of 15 blocks over 3 stories, 6 studio apartments, 3 number 1 bedrooms and 6 number 2 bedroom suites. That's kind of scope of work stuff that you would kind of say, all we need to know is like which block 2 is the only one that has 15 apartments. Like that's all really that should be asked, that should be in the description of works. So just be very conscious of what you're actually submitting into it, because at the end of the day, that's what goes on the grant. So revised information, what is actually revised information? So it's actually requested once the cert is validated. That's what it's referred to. And why is it requested? It's usually because there's insufficient information provided in order to be able to be in the position to grant the fire cert or to put very onerous conditions on it. Some fire officers or some local authorities would prefer certs to go out clean. And that means there's no conditions attached to the fire cert, so that everything's been agreed upon within the compliance report. And they don't like conditions going on them. So why we would ask for revised information? Well, how long is a piece of string? If basically every little bit in the report I've asked for revised information on. So as I said, incorrect purpose group defined, as I said, that could be also a part of pre-validation. Sometimes it's not picked up on. So we can't actually assess the cert if the wrong purpose group has been picked. So that completely throws out the timeline altogether on certs. Incorrect guidance documents reference, that sometimes gets picked up on validation as well. But if you're using TGDB and using 9991, we can't assess it straight away. So it immediately gets kicked out to ORI. And the issue is with that is you could have a subsequent ORI then asked for again. Drawings don't align up with the compliance report. This is one of the biggest issues at the moment. The drawing could show, sorry, your compliance report could say, I've got compartment floors, I've got your shaft for your stairs, all my service risers are in shafts as well. You go to your drawing, it's all fire resistant construction. They're not marrying up with each other, or it doesn't show anything on the drawing. It doesn't show any fire resistance or anything. Travel distances not put on it, or you're using travel distances instead of direct distances. You're showing direct distances, but you're using travel distances. It's just a myriad of issues when it comes to the actual drawings themselves. Specification of materials, reference and details provided. You have to remember a fire cert application, TGB is prescriptive, it's not a specification document. All I want to know is that you're providing a 60-minute wall. The building control officer, when you go out to site, they want to know how you're making up the 60 minutes. But when it comes to the report itself, all you need to tell us is that it's going to be 60 minutes. And you need to be very conscious of that. I don't need to see roof details. I don't need to see foundation detailing. I've seen wall makeups. I've seen cladding makeups on some of them. And the issue sometimes with them is we have to get them removed out of the document, because it's not up to us then to check them. That's up to then the assessor, the design certifier. And then calculations. One of the statistics at the moment is, I think it's 95% of my certs that I've granted in the last 2 years has had a B4 condition put on it, because no one seems to be getting them right. And I don't think it's just, I think it could be just the time that's been, actually one consultant I asked why every cert I get in from them has a B4 issue. They said they just use a standard format that everyone uses in the office. And apparently everyone on the floor had the exact same issue, but no one corrected it. Even though the condition was continuously put on it, no one corrected that standard use they were using in their office. It's one of the biggest pet peeves at the moment, or one of the biggest issues, sorry, at the moment, getting simple calculations wrong. And B4 has a massive implication. There's one at the moment that I have in particular that I actually know they can't build it because they can't achieve B4. And now they're going to spend a huge amount of money to start putting in fire rated glazing to be able to achieve the B4 on it. So it could have a massive knock-on effects if you're not properly putting in the correct information on it. So I just have a couple of examples of kind of revised information that I've submitted out, or I've passed on to consultants. These are only short ones. This is only 1 to 3. I think my record is 76 items on an RI. Yeah, they can get quite extensive. Now, there tend to be massive bills. And some of the issues are you haven't addressed. If they're using the likes of 991 and 9999, they can get very big. But Dublin, like you're not addressing this clause, you're not addressing this clause, you're not addressing this clause, and then the RI then starts to rack up. And then the issue is that is then when it comes back in to us to assess, it takes longer again because we have to double assess it again because there's so much RIs after coming in. So there is kind of, we do prefer just to get clean. We do prefer to get grants straight off the bat, but unfortunately some things can't be granted. And we do have to go out for revised information. This is actually a great example. So this one, I'll just read the first point because you'll probably get the gist of it. But your compliance report still reflects the entire building and not only the area of application. If the area of application only pertains to the cloakroom and the portion of the smoking area, then so shall the compliance report reflect only this area. Please amend the report to only reflect the areas of the application and note other sections, and no newer or greater contravention has occurred. So their drawing showed, or sorry, their compliance report was talking about areas outside their area of application. So that meant the drawn and the compliance report weren't marrying up with each other. They weren't aligning with each other. And they were trying to get us to assess stuff that was outside the area of application. So myself went, no, you need to then only speak about the stuff within the area of application. If you want to include the extra stuff within that application, that's fine. We'll change the application details and you'll pay the extra fee then to include those areas. But other than that, take them out. The occupancy for the smoking area appears to be the same as per the previously approved. However, the introduction of the cloakroom into the freestanding area shall minimise the standing floor area and in turn the occupancy level. Please address the occupancy level for the smoking area as stated in your additional information submitted. So this is actually a revised, or sorry, second RI that I have sent out. But they were reducing down the smoking area and they were still trying to get the same amount of people in it. So you can already tell that this was a place of assembly. They were still trying to say they were going to get X amount of people in, which that was a no. And then remove reference. This is another pet peeve at the moment. Remove reference to reprint reference FSC. from the top of the pages to the compliance report. Compliance reports are cut and paste jobs most of the time. So they'll have a residential block and they'll use it continuously for other residential blocks. So the problem is sometimes the person completing the compliance report isn't actually sitting down properly and thinking about what they're actually stating that they're going to comply with. And some of the stuff that I've gotten in could be an office block and they're stating residential on it. So I have to automatically put an ORI out. Can you please remove reference to residential, because I can't condition that out. It is, and look, I used to do it in private practice. We used to use copy and paste on a lot of reports because that's how you got jobs done quicker. But I think sitting down, you have to make sure that you're sitting down, you're coming up with a fire strategy that then has to be adapted to a live building. So you need to think about what you're actually putting down, that you're not just copying and pasting stuff out of TGB, that you're actually thinking and you're formulating a fire strategy to be put into a document, because it's going to make your design process or your certifier's job better or easier, your building control officer's job easier. Yeah, so it's just you need to start thinking about that stuff. This is another ORI that I've sent out. Please clarify the risk profile for the warehouse given office 3 and 4 are required to escape through this space. The application was only for the office space within the warehouse because they were doing a material alteration to it. Or actually they were extending it. That's why it was, they had a fire cert in for it. Now, I said previously, don't talk to me outside the scope of the application. But if you're escaping through that area, I need to know what's the risk profile, particularly with a warehouse. You need to tell me what the risk profile is, because there's limitations then on the travel distances with that. So I need to know that for clarification, because they hadn't addressed it within the report. The circulation space to the first floor is noted not to be fire rated. In addition, the space is noted to be larger in size than a standard lobby. And given that this circulation space may be treated as a room and the training room now is an inner room or double access room, please address. The lobby that they were proposing was twice the size of one of the office spaces. So you knew automatically, I knew from looking at it from a Fire Services Act point of view, there's going to be a sofa in there, there's going to be some type of furniture, there's going to be plants, there's going to be probably a photocopier put out there because it's a big open space. So I'm preempting that slightly on the fire cert. And I asked them how do they comply now that they have a double access room to an inner room. So they address that then. Is it noted that a door of, so this is just not using the correct documents. So TGDB allows for a door width 750, whereas 5588, when you use it for offices, the minimum door width is 800. So that was just something that needs to be addressed on that. Item 4, given the stairs are provided with a width of 1 meter and the main entrance door is noted to be provided with a width, sorry, it's a spell mistake, of 750 in width leading to a narrowing of escape route, please address. So the way to probably address that is to say, well, my occupancy still equates to the 750. But to me, straight away, you haven't addressed it. It's a narrow escape route. So now I've asked for clarification on it. So how are you complying with it? Please confirm that no new cavity, so cavity barriers, confirm the building is portal frame. That was probably out of the scope that I probably shouldn't have asked for, but it wasn't in the report. It wasn't in the previously approved. B4 and B5, your report notes the building hasn't been extended. However, the scope of your report notes that the internal floor has extended to provide additional floor space. Please confirm that the extended floor does not cause any newer or greater contravention, and if so, please address sections B4 and B5. This tends to get forgotten about in terms of when they internally extend floor spaces within buildings, that you still have to comply with B5. It's just, you can't just say what we tend to get in quite an awful lot is they state, well, nothing's changed there. So, well, if you go to, I can't remember the section straight off the bat, but there is a section within B5 that does state that if there's an extension, or I think there's a material alteration as well, you need to address B5. So it tends to be forgotten about. And then reasons why we would ask for extensions of time. There's actually a good few reasons that we could. So can be requested if the assessor requires more time to review the fire cert. You have to be cognizant of when fire officers are assessing certs, they also have licensing applications. We also have a large enforcement portfolio dependent on the local authority. So we have 1,000,001 other jobs to be doing on top of fire certs. Sometimes we actually just can't get around to some fire certs within the statutory limit, which is the 8 weeks. And that's when we sometimes require more time. Another reason why we require more time is the fire cert is a 60-story building, well, a 60-meter building, let's say. That's more realistic in Ireland. And it's massive, like the likes of like the Facebooks, the Googles, large residential buildings, 8 blocks over basement car parks. They take a lot of time to be able to sit down and assess. So that could be a reason why we ask for more time. Another reason for an extension time is if we've sent out a revised information, the clock's out of our hands. It's now with the consultant's hands who's submitted the application. And it's now with them to be able to submit the RI, and we can't make a decision until that revised information actually comes in. So the clock's already with them. And it's, in a way, it's slightly difficult because we have a statutory obligation for the 8 weeks, but yet now it's in their hands to do it. So it can be a bit tricky. One thing I'll say about extensions of time is they're not asked for lightly. And sometimes they're requested for the admin side of things. I'm just speaking from a Dublin Fire Brigade point of view. But when I recommend a cert, there's a number of steps it has to go through once I recommend it. So we look after 4 local authorities. So we grant stuff for DCC and we recommend for Dún Laoghaire, Fingal and South Dublin County Council. So when I grant a cert for South Dublin County Council, for say, I recommend it. It gets passed on to my senior gets passed on to the ACFO, gets passed on to the chief, then gets passed on to South Dublin. They recommend the grant. When that was paper, that was 2 weeks of a time limit. So it's like, and that's doing good, but 2 weeks. And then factor in annual leave, factor in someone's been off sick, can take up a bit of time. So we don't ask for them lightly. BCMS has completely reduced that quite down significantly because just click the button and now it's gone. And they get a notification straight away to say it's with them. So it has reduced it down, but some of the extensions of time, or some of the times we've gotten in certs and it's come to the 8 weeks and we've requested more time and they're refusing to give us more time on it. That puts a lot of pressure on the fire officer. And the issue is with that is you're more than likely going to get a condition on a cert that you're not going to like. And that's nothing that it still complies with TGDB, but it's something that you haven't put in your compliance report or something that you haven't thought about, but the fire officer has, and they've gone back to TGDB and now you have to provide it in accordance with that. So you might have an onerous condition, well, it's a condition in accordance with the building regulations, but it's something that hasn't been agreed upon between both parties. And now you might need to possibly come in for a revised application to be able to address that condition because you can't comply with it, or you need to have a compensatory measure for it. So putting pressure on the fire officer doesn't necessarily, refusing an extension of time or giving us a very limited amount of time, because some of them we've come back to and they've said, we'll give you a week. So that just covers the admin time. So you're still putting pressure on the fire officer to be able to get it out, or the assessor to get it out. Just be very conscious of that, that it could have a knock-on effect for your grant. And that's it. Thanks very much. Is there any questions or?